Good afternoon. Presently, there are around 27 million people being enslaved. This definition includes sex trafficking, child sex trafficking, forced labor, bonded labor, debt bondage, involuntary domestic servitude, forced child labor, unlawful recruitment, and the use of child soldiers. For this research project, I chose to look into sex trafficking in the continental United States. To aid in solving this problem, I am working on an open source tool that scrapes popular websites that have prostitution. The idea is sex trafficking forms a natural subset of prostitution. Thus, by classifying ads within that space, we can identify common themes of trafficking. For this research project, I chose to scrape Craigslist. Originally, I had intended to also scrape Backpage. However, due to time constraints in this semester, I was only able to scrape Craigslist, and scraping on a national level takes far too long to be reasonable at this point. Until the code can be revised, it makes no sense to scrape more than one website. Okay. So, over the next couple of minutes, I'm going to be demoing how I set up and enumerate the pages to be scraped, how I scrape the actual pages, how I clean my data, and how I classify men as women as prostitutes or not prostitutes within those advertisements. Okay, let's get started. Right now, I'm going to set up the web pages that I care about. First, let's get a look at the directory so you know I'm not lying. Okay. Now, this is going to set up a page. A file config.txt, which is going to have first link, the casual encounter section of the Craigslist, and it'll set up the index for which I'm scraping. I chose to only do 100 index, but each of these means 100 pages, 100 individual ads. So I could have made this iterate for 1,000 or 100,000 or whatever, and every 1,000 or so gets me, so every 10 pages gets me about a month's worth of data. I think that's right, yeah. Sorry, every 1,000 pages gives me a month's worth of data. Every 100 pages gives me about a day. So, sorry, every 10 pages gives me about a day. Okay. And I'm going to run automate.py. This is going to download the links that I'm actually going to be scraping, so I'm only scraping for one page. This has to do with the way Craigslist pages are set up. So typically you have, let me show you, we won't go to casual encounters, don't worry about that. Strictly platonic. Typically there are a number of links that go to individual websites. So what I did was, when I ran automate, I downloaded all of these links that are posted here. And I set them up to be scraped. Okay, let's move on. Final demo, scrape. Oh, one more thing I should note. Fig. So if we go to URLs to scrape, which is where the URLs live that I'm going to be scraping, we notice there's this issue that needs to be cleaned, because that's obviously not a legitimate URL. So I fix that in the next part of the demo. Okay, so if we go to URLs, scrape, you see that this problem is right here. That's what I'm going to do now. Run clean URLs, and this is going to go through and clean my data for me, which is wonderful and amazing and super nice. So you can see here, it's all clean. Okay, now we're going to run recursive scrape, and this is going to actually go through and visit every single web page that I specified in URLs to scrape and download the content from there. Unfortunately, this does take a bit of time, as you can imagine, because it's visiting, I think, about 100 web pages, and it can only process about 3 or 4 a second. However, what we can do is we can look at results and see them being populated for a second. Obviously, we're not going to watch this whole demo because that would be sad and boring and stuff. All right. So clearly, I've pre-populated this in another folder, which I'm now going to go to. All right. Great. So now we have our results. We can see that by going to the results folder. Hey, look, all of my results. It's a whole bunch. Don't worry about what results CSV means. That's just some internal thing for me. Why is this not? Oh, I know why. Okay. Oops. All right. Now we're going to filter the results based on whether they are a man or a woman. And now we're going to filter the results whether or not they are well, so the above one filtered out the men, this one filters out the women. So now if we go back to results, we see two new folders, results men and results women. And basically what that did is it looked to see, well, I can show you the code. Results filter. What it does is it runs a series of functions, man looking for woman specifically, and picture check, just to do the parsing. These other functions will be used, but they won't be able to be used in this implementation. So right now what this does is picture exists. I wonder why this is commented. Oh, okay. So for men, I don't check to see if they have a picture. I just check to see if it's a man searching for a woman. That seems to be enough. Typically, most men are looking for prostitutes if they're using Craigslist. So for women, I actually check for a picture because typically prostitutes post pictures, but sometimes women just use it looking for men. Anyway, so moving on. Cool. All right. Let's look at results. Filter women. And the picture should be there. Yeah, so here, test includes pictures. All right, and then it just moves anything with the women searching for men attribute somewhere in the body or in the title, and the picture attribute, and it moves it into the results folder. All right, let's go to the next folder, CD, where am I now, classify. Obviously, I've set this one up as well. Results. And so, this has a bunch of the men that were moved into this folder by running this script, the results filter men script. And then what I did is I classified a bunch of these as Johns, as not Johns, or hard to classify. And then what the Bayesian, and then I classify the remaining links or remaining web pages based on a naive Bayesian classifier. I'll go back through that in a second because I'm going to actually run the Bayesian classifier right now. Excuse me. All right, so Python classify women. Why is that not working? Oh, I'm in results. Huh. Okay, so I'm going to run this now. And what this is doing is it's doing naive Bayesian classification, like I just said. What that means is it's treating each word in a post body as independent of all the other words, and that's why it's called naive, because it treats each word as independent. Now, naively assumes that they're not related, and that you can actually still classify this text. And then it looks at all the features that are in words that, or sorry, paragraphs that you know have this feature you're looking for. So in this case, I'm looking for is a prostitute. And it's usually pretty easy to tell by inspection, but you don't want to have to go through and classify all of those. So the Bayesian classifier does that for me. After I classify a couple of records, it then takes care of the rest of them. In fact, we can go into results, and we can see all the ones it's going to classify. Not that many, just because it can take some time, so I wanted it to be quick. But in any case, it's going to run, and then when it gives us our output, so I'm going to go back to explaining now. So, where was I? Right. Okay, so this naive Bayesian classifier treats each word like a feature, in a data set, essentially. If you know anything about machine learning, this should be fairly familiar to you. This is typically how machine learning is done. And these prostitutes or non-prostitutes are hard to classify, in the case for women, are the training data. And then I verify the classification algorithm based on splitting the training data in half. And then, since I know the result already, I know whether or not someone belongs in the prostitute or not prostitute folder. So essentially I'm making a binary decision. And then I move anything that's classified as a prostitute into the prostitution folder, and anything that's not classified as a prostitute into the non-prostitution folder. And then everything else gets moved into hard to classify. So great. So the classification is now done. We can see the results. So the word sit, many, much, meaning the words sit, many, much, meaning boy, might, has, put, breast, and fire, all for some reason relate to being a prostitute. And this is the relative ranking of the features effectiveness is ranking a prostitute or not prostitute. 27 is pretty good. 16 is not as good, obviously. And it's a sliding scale from there. And this bottle classifies with 95% accuracy, which is pretty damn good for statisticians. Unfortunately, there's still a bit of noise. When I have more training data, it typically gets around 99%, but obviously that takes much longer to run. So I wanted to be able to show it in demoing time. Okay, let's move on. So, okay, great. Let's now move on. So that was if you want to classify one area, or if you want to look at one area of Craigslist. So like Craigslist, I don't know how many of you know this, Craigslist is split up into communities. So there's a bunch for Alabama, Illinois, Montana, New Jersey, all over. New York has a lot. Texas and California obviously have a lot because they're both big states too. So you can actually even do this internationally, which is really cool. But the point I'm trying to get at is that there's not one Craigslist. There's a bunch of little Craigslist. And you can zoom in on all of them on this map, which is pretty cool. Anyway, so the challenge that I'm faced with now is trying to scrape all of Craigslist, all these little purple dots. But don't worry, I handled that case. So we're going to now go on to national scraping. And then I'll sort of explain why I'm looking at national scraping. Okay, so now I'm going to run initialize. And what this does is it calls config.py for basically the entire country. And we'll see in a second. I should show you that like before. So national config. All right, now there's all these things. I wasn't fast enough. But basically this does every community in the entire country. And it just does what I did for the last part of the talk where I was doing all of that up here separately. Now I'm doing it all at once. So this obviously takes a very long time to run. I'm looking into ways of making it faster. I think the right thing to do is just have the computation be distributed and do each of these on a different server instance and then grab all the results and then put them somewhere else. But obviously I don't have access to an army of servers, so this becomes challenging. Right, so now that I've set all that up, and you can see, let's just go into anyone, so Sandusky. And all of the files that were in the original scraper are ready to go, and I can just run, and the config.txt there is already filled out. So if we go into config.txt, we see all the indexes that it's going to visit within casual encounters. Isn't that wonderful? And I'm going to scrape around 10,000 pages. Cool. So that takes a much longer, but that gets you about a month's worth of data. Cool. So now we're going to go on to national setup. And we're going to run the setup scrape. What this is going to do is it's going to go to each of the web pages. Don't worry about that. It just means that those pages literally don't exist on the site. It's going to go to each of the pages that were listed in each of the config.txts for all of the places on Craigslist. And then it's going to download all of those pages, which is pretty nuts. You can see if you look really fast at some of the things that are streaming by, and it's obviously not the most awesome content in the world. All right, this is going to take forever to run, though. I think it takes about 3 or 4 hours, so we're going to move on. And now we're going to go, but as you can see, ooh, if I go to the random page, oh, what was one that ran? Probably Milwaukee, maybe? No. Let's try Minneapolis. No. Okay. Let's look up. So, Fresno. Fresno ran. Alright, let's go into Fresno. Alright. And you can see the Craigslist TXT was generated. And list of web pages was generated so that we can go ahead and scrape these later. Sayings, they're so disgusting. Oh well. Occupational hazard, right? Alright, cool. Let's go now to the final thing. National scrape. Alright, so this has all the directories, and let's just go to some random one. Let's do something in the A's, since we looked at the F's before. How about Asheville? I've never been to Asheville. I've never even heard of Asheville. Alright, cool. So that has the scraper, and it's got all this stuff. So now we can go ahead and run scrape, and then it should download all the pages. So let's scrape.py. Now what this is going to do is it's actually going to start the scraper for all of these, and it's going to visit each of the pages, and it's going to generate the results folder. So this is doing it now for Jonesboro. You can see it right there. Alright, so in order to see it, you get the idea. This takes forever, obviously. Okay. So let's go to Jonesboro, and look, there's a results folder now. And these are all the results that happen. I would cat this, but it's disgusting, I'm sure. So anyway, in conclusion, finished. So that's the demo. So now I'm going to explain why I was doing all of that, just really briefly, and then I'm going to end. So the theory is, if you can figure out where people move across the country based on the pictures that they post on Craigslist, then you might be able to understand trafficking. Because right now all I'm doing is finding prostitutes. But the results for national scrapes take a couple of days, and if you want to go back any considerable amount of time, it can take like a week, which is part of the reason why I wasn't able to get any further results. But I believe a lot of really cool stuff is going to come out of this project, and hopefully I'll be able to continue it for perpetuity and keep growing and building and making something that's going to help a lot of people. Okay, thanks very much, and have a good day. Bye.